Welcome to 5 Good Minutes.
You're listening to today's inspirational message on the book of Esther
with Brady Randall.
Today we'll be looking at verses 4 to 8, and this is what we read. "If it pleases the king," replied Esther, "let the king together with Haman come today to a banquet that I have prepared for him." "Bring Haman at once," the king said, "so that we may do what Esther asked." So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared. And as they were drinking wine, the king again asked Esther, "Now what is your petition? It will be given to you. And what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be granted." Esther replied, "My petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet that I will prepare for them, and then I will answer the king's question." Esther had a desire to help her fellow Jews. She had been seeking the heart of God, and now she's with the king and Haman, eating the food that she'd prepared. And here before her was the king and the enemy. So she's biding her time to catch Haman further off guard, while at the same time ensuring that the king is in his best possible spirits and mood. And the king is in such a good mood that he offers up to half of his kingdom. So he's going bold. And I want you to notice how Esther answers in verse 8. She said, "If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then basically let him come to the banquet, and then she'll answer the king's question." And that word "if" really struck me in this section. Esther had a plan, and she's ultimately leaving her plan up to God. Her plan is dependent on if the king should grant her wish. Her plan is dependent on things that are outside of her control. And this "if" is often required when it comes to a relationship with God, having a total dependent trust on God. We see this kind of "if" fade played out in scriptures elsewhere. For example, in Daniel chapter 3, King Nebuchadnezzar says he's going to throw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the fiery furnace unless they bow down and worship the gold statue that Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And they refuse to do that because they believe that that would dishonor their God. And this is what they say in verse 16 of Daniel chapter 3. They replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of God you have set up." Do you hear that? We will not bow down. We will continue to serve our God, and God is able to save us. But even if he does not, we will not bow down. That reminds me also of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he's getting ready to go to the cross, and he's literally there sweating drops of blood because he knows how awful the cross is going to be. Not just the physical ramifications, the blood that would be spilled, a crown of thorns, the mocking, the spitting on him, the stakes driven through his flesh. But I think what really had Jesus sweating drops of blood was the fact that he was getting ready to experience the very wrath of God, being forsaken by his Father. And this is what he says in Luke chapter 22, verse 42. He says, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but your will be done." God, if there is any other way than the cross, but ultimately there is not. And what he goes on to say, he goes on steadfastly to the cross because of his love for you and for me, and ultimately for his Father. Finally, in James chapter 4, we read this similarly, starting in verse 13. "Now listen, those who say today or tomorrow we will go and do this, go to this city, spend a year here, carry on business and make money. Why, you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You're like a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that." But ultimately, we leave this in the hands of God. And that's what Esther is doing. And that's what you and I are encouraged to do as well. And so I just want to know, what does that look like for you in this season? What are you being called to have, even if faith right now? Maybe you're praying for resolution in a relationship or reconciliation of a family member. Maybe you're praying for a healing or You're willing to walk out in faith and say, God, this is what I'm praying for. This is my heart's desire. But even if you don't answer in the way that I want, yet I will still trust you. And so I'm asking that God would help you and I to do just that.
Thanks for joining us here today. There's a lot of great content to explore on Orchard Hill Plus and on the Orchard Hill main feed from the weekend. Have a great day.